Waverly Knobs Entertainment presents the Branch Out Podcast with your hosts Evan Charles Anderson and Tatiana Ivan. We discuss all the exciting facets of digital media and marketing for businesses and professionals. Our goal is to empower you so you can increase your knowledge, engagement, and brand identity. Let's get ready to branch out.
Thank you for joining us on episode 47 of Branch Out. This is your host, Tatiana Ivan, and I'm here with Evan Charles Anderson. And today, we have a very special guest, Larry Yu. And for those of you that don't know him, he is the co-founder and managing director of Kite Global Advisors and the managing editor of the Milken Institute Review. And before all that, he was an editor at Strategy+Business magazine and a global thought leadership fellow for PricewaterhouseCoopers. So, Larry, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You have a long list of history there. I'm
I left some parts out. You can see everything in our description. If you go on our SoundCloud episode at the bottom, we'll list all of the different places where you can stalk Larry, including on Twitter as well. And you can have a personal conversation with him directly if you want to.
I encourage it, in fact.
So, Larry, you are actually the second guest on our show to have a writing background. You were also actually a ghostwriter for 2 books on corporate governance and featured in the Harvard Business Review. So tell us a little bit about your professional journey. How did you get from writing to Kite Global Advisors?
Thanks. Yeah, it was a journey. In fact, I don't think they write up my background as kind of a case study on career development. After school, I went and worked for a consulting firm helping to run their publications, and then left there and decided to start freelancing. But I wasn't particularly interested in journalism, and I wasn't particularly interested in advertising, copywriting. And that's probably 90% of freelance writing. So it kind of left me with not a lot of options. I think I got pretty lucky in a lot of things that I did, and I happened to meet the right people at the right time. You know, they officially would call it networking, but I don't think I thought I was networking at the time. I was just sort of walking around and meeting people, and met some great consultants who brought me on for a couple of projects. I ended up working for McKinsey for a couple summers doing some writing for them, and I met some nonprofit consultants and ended up doing some grant writing and strategic planning for them while I'm doing some client work. And I also met Joel Kurtzman, who later became a mentor of mine, and did some work for him, some consulting work for him. He was at the time a columnist for Fortune magazine, so I was stringing for him. And he's the former editor of Harvard Business Review and former editor of the Sunday edition of the New York Times business section, that is. So he was a great help for me, and he brought me in for a couple other projects, bringing me into strategy and business, for example. He brought me into Milken Institute Review as well, and he would just kept launching new projects and kept bringing me along for them, and it really was fortuitous that I met him.
So he gets a Christmas card every year, is that?
Yeah, absolutely, he does, yeah.
Well, and it's amazing, too, when things like that kind of come about, right? It's always more so by happenstance than being planned out when it comes to just these different opportunities. And as you said, it wasn't about networking. It was just connecting with people and just doing what you enjoy doing and trying to go for that direction. And it just kind of came together rather than really just setting the goal and say, okay, I'm going to talk to this person because of X, Y, Z. It gets me this opportunity. And just kind of fell together, which I think is great to hear, because I think a lot of times that's what happens. It's very much like in sales too. You know, it's not about just trying to get them to sign on the dotted line, but the rapport that you build and just see what kind of happens, nurture the relationship. And that's why we talk about business relationships more so than just, well, it's just a sale or something like that. So it's great to see that you were able to nurture those relationships the way you did.
Absolutely. I agree with that. I mean, I think if I was trying to be purposeful about networking, I would have failed because I'm just not that good at it. I'm probably more of an introvert than an extrovert. And, if you put me, particularly at the time, in my 20s, if you put me in a room and said, go network, I probably would have just sat in the corner anyway. I think I'm better at it now as a purposeful practice to network, but at the time, certainly, I would not have been able to do it had I been in the mindset that I was networking. I would not have been able to network.
I think we were actually talking about that earlier. Writing a book on how to network for introverts, because I could use that also.
Yeah, I know. I think I've been to a lot of networking events where I really enjoyed the pretzels. The pretzels were great. Now that's about all I remember from that. So. I'm completely right there with you. I think it's very, very difficult when you are more naturally an introvert, right, to put yourself out there, especially as an entrepreneur, where that's a lot of it, is throwing yourself out there and just see what happens. Actually, out of curiosity, how was that a challenge for you? Going into now becoming a co-founder of Kite and everything. Like, what were the challenges of kind of breaking out of that shell?
Well, I think I've gotten over my fear of networking for sure. I mean, I'm pretty good at it now, and I feel very natural doing it now. So I just can't do it 24 hours a day. So I think over time I've gotten over some of that and sort of learned how to do it and be effective at it. And I think some of that is through positive reinforcement that I found that I'm effective at it, and more importantly, probably I found that I don't essentially turn people off by doing it, right? So getting that kind of positive feedback sort of helps cultivate your own skills and confidence in doing it.
Well, and as they say too, the answer to all unasked questions is no.
That's right. Yeah,
So.
yeah. I didn't realize I was going to be speaking so personally about my own skills development. So.
We'll edit this out later. Yeah. No, you know what I think is nice, because a lot of the entrepreneurs and businesses that we've actually talked with on our show have a lot of different common threads. One being that non-linear kind of career development path, and the other is I think most of them are introverts. So I think that's an interesting thing to also show to our listeners. That you don't always have to be somebody or have a particular skill set that you think people need to have in order to be successful. You can sort of carve out your own path to whatever success looks like and feels like for you as well. So
I am comfortable talking about it. It's probably something that I've come to realize over many years, to reflect on what I'm good at and what I've learned to do and what I need to do. And so as long as when you become conscious of those things and you start to think about them, not necessarily in a textbook kind of way, but just think about what has worked and how you've gotten where you've gotten, you get comfortable, in your own skin about it, talking about it.
When we hear thought leadership, especially in relation with a company's brand messaging or overall communications, now you yourself noted that thought leadership means more than great writing. So can you tell us what is thought leadership? And as a part of Kite Global Advisors, how do you and your team help companies try to leverage this concept?
We actually have a fairly long definition of thought leadership, so I have to read it off of this sheet of paper here. So we define thought leadership as the practice of generating novel, evidence-based ideas on issues that are intertwined with an organization's brand. It reflects an awareness of how these issues affect the broader environment in which the business operates and seeks to enable key stakeholders to improve their own practices. I think there are three things there that I really want to focus on. The first is evidence-based ideas. So we stress that thought leadership has to have some empiricism behind it, some research behind it, something that says why this is true. It's not having a great idea, it's proving that great idea actually is real, which is a little bit odd to say in this post-truth economy, but we still hold by that belief. The second thing is how these issues affect the broader environment in which the business operates. We want to broaden people's horizons and talk about thought leadership, not just as a commercial relationship, but as a company's relationship with all of its stakeholders. And so then the last part is enables key stakeholders to improve their own practices. Again, we want thought leadership to really speak to improving stakeholders and how they look at things. So it's not necessarily will you click and buy this product, or will I look better? It's how can we help you? It's addressing your pain points, stakeholders' pain points, either directly or indirectly in some way. And that may not be a commercial way. It may not be, this is the way that my product helps you. It may be, hey, here's how we can make a difference in the community together by working together. So we have a broader view, I think, of thought leadership than some people address it. Less content marketing focused. We think content marketing is a channel for thought leadership, but it is not synonymous for thought leadership. So how do we help clients? We look at thought leadership as having potentially 4 different objectives. The first is around pursuing your commercial objectives. So that's where it's closest to marketing, but it can also inform things like strategy. If you're doing some market research and doing psychographic research, that can lead to not only to insights for strategy, but also insights to inform thought leadership. The second is around brand and reputation. So certainly companies want to use thought leadership to make themselves look better in some way. I think they pursue certain brand attributes through thought leadership around, how smart they are, but also what kinds of things they want to be associated with. Thought leadership helps them do that in ways that are more authentic than just a tagline. That's probably the second objective for thought leadership. The third and fourth are a little different. The third is around engaging your workforce. We have found that thought leadership can be effective at, depending on what the thought leadership is about, can be effective at bringing people together within your organization around a concept or a theme or an ideal. I mean, certainly if you want to be known for sustainability, for example, then doing some thought leadership around that and bringing your team together around that is a really powerful way of engaging your workforce. And then lastly is to make a difference in the world. A lot of times thought leadership is around issues in the community or issues around the world. So issues that are again are broader than just what your customers face. It's what all of your stakeholders face. We increasingly see thought leadership focused on those kinds of issues. With that said, there's a second part of making a difference in the world, which is just adding to the state of knowledge in the world. So there are things that are much less save the world that you still want to add to the stock of knowledge in the world and that companies are doing, separated from their commercial goals directly, but still advancing that sort of making a difference in the world by adding to how smart we all are, essentially.
It's always a worthy goal.
I think it's great to hear, though, because I feel like many people do believe as thought leadership is like, hey, I shared a tweet on something. But it goes so much deeper than that. And I really like hearing that, especially the fact of the focus on just the community good, the social good, as well as how do we bring our employees together. And I think that's something that's often overlooked. But I think it's something that is very admirable to focus in on, and I think it's very important that we do so. I think that was a perfect answer to that, and to really give people a larger sense of the impact that thought leadership can have.
Yeah, I mean, that tweet is perfectly fine if it emerges from, I mean, it's perfectly fine anyway, but as part of a thought leadership program, it fits in terms of once you've done an amount of research on an issue, and then you can use Twitter as a great channel for it. You can then do your listicle blog posts. That's fine, that's great, but if you don't have this body of research behind it, then it becomes more ephemeral, and I think it has more impact, it has more lasting value when it's really backed by some research.
And going back to that, using thought leadership to bring your workforce together too, I think is really great, because especially as companies scale up and there's more and more departments, and it starts to feel a little bit less like the individual person is making a strong contribution. They start to feel a little bit more like they're in a cog in some giant wheel that they're not really sure what they're there for anymore and everything like that. And it's really nice for companies to then also take a look at their workforce, and those are the stakeholders as well, getting them engaged, showing, this is what you're here for, this is our mission, this is our messaging, this is our brand, you're a part of that. Let's all kind of be a little bit more transparent about what we're doing, and you're not just coming in, clocking out. So I think that's actually a really good point to emphasize too, that I don't think necessarily too, when people think about thought leadership for their bigger companies as well, they may not necessarily think about, our workforce is an audience that can also benefit from this. I just thought it was a great point. I'm glad you brought it up as well for that, calling it out.
Your workforce, they're the best ambassadors for your brand that you have. So, if you don't empower them with the tools to represent what your brand is every day, then, you're really missing an opportunity to reinforce what your brand stands for.
Yeah, it's interesting because companies always try to look for the evangelists, the ones who will, sing praises for them and stuff and get their name out there. And when really it's like you have that force already built in. It's called your employees. Get them to, sing you from the mountaintops and get your name out there and say, well, this is the culture and this is what we're really about. And these are our main motives and philosophies behind what we do. And that gets people excited. And we feel, I think, as an audience too, that we can trust that because, they work there, but they're not trying to sell me on anything. They really are truly excited about being there. And that can be very infectious.
Spot on. That's absolutely right. I mean, you go out and look for the evangelists in the marketplace, but what about the evangelists within your own organization? I think they're sort of forgotten about, right? But you really want those people to be your evangelists. You want your alumni as well to be your evangelists. You don't want them to walk away from your company thinking bad things. Yeah, exactly.
I can say that on the podcast, right? Crappy?
Yeah, that's perfectly fine, yeah.
So in this day and age, content is it seems like it's really easy to make, right? Where it's digital media, it's print collateral. You write a few words, you throw a bunch of images together, you make a quick live video on your phone. So what's I think the challenge is, and Larry, if you can speak to this, how do we create smarter and longer lived content, right? What are some of the factors that separate content that's just, for lack of a better term, noise, and content that is smarter, evergreen, has an impact?
Sure. I mean, people talk about content often in terms of its reach and its relevance, and yet they focus mostly on reach. So they focus on clicks, they focus on, engagement measures around that. But relevance has a time perspective to it that needs to be considered. And, the really powerful content is content that someone comes back to and wants to come back to it. So it's not just one moment they smile or one moment they think. It's, I don't want to say a lifetime, perhaps that's too long, but there are things that will stick in your memory and you'll think, oh, I need to go back and look at that one report because that has that one piece of data that I need. And so that's why we think thought leadership really can imbue content with that kind of character, that kind of relevance for audiences. So empiricism certainly adds to that, because if you have some novel research that shows a point, people are going to remember that you're the source for that, and they'll come back to it. And then another thing is engagement. So if you, back in the days before the internet was a primary channel for content and for thought leadership, you would produce thought leadership with a thump factor, right? And that meant you could thump it on a CEO's desk and it had this weightiness that represented the power of all the thinking that went into it, right? So books were big. As like you have this big book, or you'd produce a report that had extra pages in it just so that it would have more heft to it. I'm exaggerating, but you'd certainly consider the binding. You would consider, the feel of the document, of the report, and you wanted it to have that sort of heft and authority behind it. And that's because the primary engagement was that thump, was you walking into the CEO's office and putting it down on someone's desk. Yeah, you have to find new ways to engage people now that the internet is such a prominent channel for distribution. But face-to-face is another way to do it. And so we think adding to content or reinforcing content that you put out on the internet by holding events, by giving people tools to have face-to-face meetings, by linking all of those things together, conferences, events, even just tools to give someone talking points for a conversation on the phone, those are all reinforcing points that help to add relevance to that one piece of content that you may put on your website. You never want to just publish a PDF on your website and walk away from it and tweet a couple times and walk away from it. You want to create this whole program of engagement with your audience or with maybe several secondary audiences to reinforce that kind of engagement over time. That's, I think, what has relevance.
I really like the fact that you brought up the in-person effect, too, with the type of content you share with someone just by speaking with them. I've noticed this, too, when I'm, for instance, at these networking events that we talked about where I'm munching on pretzels. And, every once in a while when I take a break from the pretzels and if they have an open bar from the whiskey, and I go and talk to someone, it's always interesting because I love facts. I love percentages. I love numbers that I can just give people because it not only is beneficial to you in reinforcing why you do what you do, but it also gives something for free to that individual that you're speaking with, and it gives them a new way of thinking. And you're challenging their thinking by giving them a statistic like, 64% of people use their mobile device to interact with this and this and this piece of content. Whereas if I just said, this is what we do. We create content and it really works. That doesn't have the same type of substance or weight to it as we're talking about that thump factor. If you have the right words and you have the right stats, what you say can still have a weightiness to it that really sticks with someone. And it's a great way of standing out, too, in comparison to everyone else who's like, well, guess what? This is why we do what we do, because of things like this, this percentage of this and this ratio of these people. And we've noticed that actually there's a big increase in this group and that group, but a diminishing group of this. So you start pulling out all those factors, and it really creates, a more elaborate picture to the people you're trying to connect with. And it just gives them such a better sense of that world that they just don't really maybe have insight into, which is why you're there to provide them that service. I
think you probably remember the person who told you the statistic more than you remember the person who did, depending on how much whiskey you had anyway. It's reinforcing as well. So not only is it more impactful in terms of how you receive that data and that person, but it's also more impactful in that you remember who it was, and so it cycles back.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes it's even more important than a business card at times. You go at the end of the night, you leave, and you have a bunch of cards with you, and then you're like, well, who was that person again? Who did I talk with? But as soon as you give them that bit of statistical data, that becomes just so much stronger. And now they associate that with you and they remember you.
Yeah, you're going to say, hey, I want to learn more about that research that they just did, or, what's behind that number. So, that's the call you're more likely to make the next day.
So you've had the pleasure of working with large companies, various industries, and you got to see what works, what doesn't. In your opinion, what companies are succeeding in their thought leadership? What showcasing meaningful content? What are the success metrics for that?
So, I think the gold standard among professional services firms is probably McKinsey. It's probably still McKinsey. They're not a current client. I did work for them probably 20 years ago, but so just in full disclosure.
Can you actually tell our listeners what or who McKinsey?
McKinsey & Company is a strategy consulting firm. It's regarded as one of the top strategy consulting firms, and they have had a long-standing program of thought leadership that, as I say, is probably considered the gold standard. They have a journal that is top-notch. They have a lot of empiricism behind everything they do, and one of the powerful reasons why they're able to do that is that they actually tie some incentives for their consultants to participate in knowledge creation, which includes their thought leadership programs. So they get their brightest minds actually want to contribute. And I think that's a powerful thing that they're able to bring. With that said, professional service firms is probably where thought leadership really has its origins, or really at least began to mature. But more companies outside of professional services are really embracing thought leadership now. We see, certainly finance companies and tech companies and probably pharma companies as well. So companies that are in knowledge-intensive industries always want to show off some thought leadership. But even beyond that, to consumer-facing, which is not necessarily always considered as knowledge-intensive, is embracing thought leadership for lots of reasons in terms of how they want to express their brand or how they want to engage with stakeholders. So I just saw the other day, IKEA, for example, had a piece of thought leadership done in conjunction with the Economist Intelligence Unit on discovering the new American dream, which is not something you would expect IKEA to produce a report on.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know.
Especially one where the name is something I actually understand. It's
Yeah,
not the
exactly.
Ugenflagen, Hutenhagen. Yeah.
Exactly. And I don't know how the report came to be, but my suspicion is that they were doing some market research, on American consumers, and got some insights out of that research that helps to drive their strategy. So that was pure conjecture, but I do suspect that IKEA was doing some market research on their own and decided to not only use it to inform their strategy, but also to produce something that's more public facing, and put up a microsite around the new American dream, which was actually kind of interesting.
Is there ever like a finish line for thought leadership? Like, oh, I did this, this, and this, I'm done? Or is it something that companies should do on a more consistent basis?
Yeah, hopefully no. There shouldn't really be a finish line, and I don't say that only because it's self-serving for me. Obviously it is, but a lot of impactful thought leadership is longitudinal in its research, meaning it takes place over a long period of time and repeats it, so you can sort of take the temperature at different points in time, in essence. So that's when you can really see trends happening. Instead of just a snapshot, you can see a trend happening, and that's probably more powerful. So that's often more powerful and more informative and more useful for stakeholders. So we think these programs should be long-standing and extend over a long period of time. Now, even if it's just a spot program, though, as I say, you don't want to just publish something and put it on a bookshelf and walk away. You want to build this whole program around it. You want to get more out of it by giving your sales staff tools to talk about it with their customers or their prospects. You want to give tools for your suppliers so that they can understand the direction you're moving in and the direction that they need to move towards as well. So there are lots of stakeholders to consider, and you may need to produce different things to engage all of them over a period of time.
So now, you've basically given so much great content and thought leadership already in the amount of information that you've shared with us. But what we do have is a wow segment, which is a words of wisdom. With all that information that you've just mentioned, to kind of put the cherry on the top for new writers out there, or even new businesses that are either struggling to get their voice heard or what have you, what do you recommend that they do, right now, right out of the gate, to create something meaningful, some really intensive kind of conversation with their audience?
I think there are three things, really. First is, as lots of writers would tell you, know your audience. And that doesn't just mean know who they are, although that's a start. You really need to know what's on their mind. ideally show some empathy for, look at the world from their perspective and think about what they need to hear from there. You may think of it in terms of pain points, or you may think of it in terms of their everyday experiences and understanding their experiences. You have to place yourself in their mind in order just to really sort of start that conversation. And by the way, have a conversation, right? So a conversation is two-way, so listening is a big part of that as well.
So you can just share, me,
Yeah.
look at me, this is what I do.
Yeah, I mean, if you listen first, often you'll have a better response that might resonate with your audience. So that's the first piece. The second piece is probably just around research. We've talked about it a little bit, but we really stress empiricism as something that helps to back up. You can be bolder in what you say if you have something to back it up, and it's also can be more memorable when you have data behind what you're trying to assert. And then the third is to be multidisciplinary in your approaches. We try to assemble teams with mixes of social scientists and economists and finance experts, and just to have people look at problems from different perspectives. And you often get kind of crazy, creative, interesting perspectives that turn into new ideas because of that. So get out of your space, think from different disciplines. Try to get input from different disciplines, and you may come up with something really kind of interesting and out of the box.
Nice. So basically assemble a team of Avengers and go fight the world's problems. I like it.
That would be a good answer, yeah.
Well, if you want to check out Larry and all of his Avengers, make sure to check out the link below for Kite Global Advisors, as well as more information on everything Larry, including his Twitter. Check him out, tweet at him, say hi. And also, don't forget to subscribe and rate us. Let us know what your thoughts are and what you want to hear. And until then, don't forget also, we are on the Facebooks, facebook.com/branchoutpodcast, all one word. And other than that, we will see you next time. Thank you very much, Larry, for joining us today.